Hello, today we're going over section 3.5, which is developing and applying the quadratic formula. So we'll start out by doing one of the questions from the last section, and then we'll use the same steps to create our quadratic formula and then use that to solve some questions. So we want to use our completing the square from last section to solve x squared plus 5x plus 4 equals 0. So if you remember, our first step is to put in our blanks. So we'd have x squared plus 5x plus a blank plus 4 minus a blank equals 0. Now in that blank is our b value divided by 2 and squared. In this case, our b value was 5. So we'd have 5 over 2 squared, so that would be 25 over 4. So we'd have plus 25 over 4 and minus 25 over 4. Now what that has done is create a perfect square trinomial, which factoring this, we take the square root of x squared, get x. Square root of 25 over 4 is 5 over 2. We had a plus here, so it's a plus here. We then combine these like terms. I'll just do that calculation over here. So we have 4 minus 25 over 4. We need the same denominator so we can add these. So I'd multiply the top and bottom by 4 over 4. So that gives us 16 over 4 minus 25 over 4, which gives us negative 9 over 4. So we've got minus 9 over 4 equals 0. Our next step would be to move the 9 over 4 to the other side. So we have x plus 5 over 2 equals 9 over 4. At this stage, we want to get rid of the squared, so we take the square root of both sides. So that gives us x plus 5 over 2 is equal to plus or minus, we can take the square root of both ways, so plus or minus 3 over 2. So I'll split that into two equations. So we have x plus 5 over 2 equals negative 3 over 2. And we also have x plus 5 over 2 is equal to positive 3 over 2. So we'll move the 5 over 2 to the other side. So that gives us x is equal to negative 4. This one also moved for 5 over 2 to the other side. And that gives us x equals negative 1. Now to come up with our quadratic formula, we are using the exact same steps, but we're dealing with variables for it. So our quadratic formula is a fail-proof way of finding the solution to a quadratic equation of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a, b, and c are coefficients. Essentially, if there is solutions to it, our quadratic formula will give us the solutions to it. And once we have a formula, all we need to do is figure out what our a, b, and c values are and plug them into a formula. So our very first step of coming up with our quadratic formula is to divide everything by a. So that's going to give us x squared plus b over ax. We'll put in our blank, so plus blank, plus c over a minus a blank is equal to 0. Now in our blank is going to go our b over 2 squared. In this case, our b is b over a. So we have b over a divided by 2 squared. So that's the same as b over 2a squared. So that's b squared over 4a squared. So we'll put in b squared over 4a squared. We'll put brackets around our first three terms, which form our perfect square trinomial, and then factor it. So it becomes x plus b over 2a squared. And then we'll combine these terms. I'll do it over here. So we have c over a minus b squared over 4a squared. So if this doesn't have a 4 or if a squared, so we need to multiply the top and bottom by 4a. So we have 4ac over 4a squared minus b squared over 4a squared. So we can combine that to a single term. So that's 4ac minus b squared over 4a squared. So we have plus 4ac minus b squared over 4a squared equals 0. Next step will be to move this to the other side. So that will give us x plus b over 2a squared is equal to negative 4ac minus b squared over 4a squared. Next is to take the square root, but we can't take the square root that's negative in front, so we'll transfer the negative into these and reorder them. So we have x plus b over 2a squared is equal to, when I multiply the negative in, the negative b squared becomes positive b squared. The positive 4ac becomes negative 4ac. And that's over 4a squared. So our next step now is to get rid of the square root, or sorry, squared by taking the square root. So that gives us x plus b over 2a is equal to, we can't take the square root of the numerator, but we can take the square root of the denominator. So we have plus or minus b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. We'll continue this up here. And we'll move b over 2a to the other side. So we have x is equal to negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You'll notice these have the same denominator, so we can combine it into a single term. And that gives us x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. And this here is our quadratic formula. We will now use it to help us solve some quadratic functions. Okay, so for example, solve 2x squared plus 3x minus 1. So this does take the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. So we just take out our values of a, b, and c and put them into that formula. So we know our a is equal to 2, our b is equal to 3, and our c is negative 1. Now our quadratic formula is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. So we'll fill in our information. So we have negative b, so negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4 times our a value of 2 times our c value of negative 1 over 2 times our a value of 2. We'll then go through this and gradually simplify it. So we have negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared is 9. Then we've got negative 4 times 2 is negative 8 times negative 1 would be positive 8 over 2 times 2, so over 4. Simplifying this further, we've got negative 3 plus or minus square root of 17 over 4. And we can't change 17 into a mixed radical or take the square root of it. So this is as simplified as this answer will get. Okay, another example, we've got 6x squared minus x equals 2. So this is not in the ax squared plus bx plus c format. So we need to move the 2 to the other side. So that's going to give us 6x squared minus x minus 2 equals 0. Now we'll get our a, b, and c values. So a is 6, b is -1, and c is -2. We have our formula, x is equal to -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. So we'll start filling in our values. So we have negative of -1 plus or minus the square root of -1 squared minus 4 times our a value of 6 times our c value of -2. And then that's being divided by 2 times our a value of 6. So we have negative of -1, so that's +1, plus or minus the square root of 1. -4 times 6 is -24, times -2 would be +48. That's being divided by 2 times 6, so 12. So that gives us 1 plus or minus the square root of 49 over 12. We can take the square root of 49, so that gives us 1 plus or minus 7 over 12. So we have two solutions. So we have x is equal to 1 plus 7 divided by 12. And we also have x is equal to 1 minus 7 divided by 12. So 1 plus 7 is 8 divided by 12. We'll reduce that to lower terms. So that's 2/3. The next one, 1 minus 7 is -6 divided by 12. Reduce that to lower terms. And we have -1/2. So our two solutions would be x is 2/3 and -1/2. Okay, so practice for this section starts on page 200.